Hey, welcome! If you're new, I'm Jade Theophanes, and I'm writing a dystopian gaslamp fantasy novel, but as I'm sure you noted by the title, it took me 6 years to get here, so let's discuss why. Back in 2019, I was a baby writer. I had just discovered Brandon Sanderson, so as you can assume, I was very passionate about fantasy. I was very passionate about world building and intriguing characters with magic and action-packed stories. And I was also already obsessed with the Hunger Games. Really, that is what primed me for this story, so I'm sure you can catch some of the vibes before I've even started. Anyway, I was at a football game after musical rehearsals, because yes, I was a theater kid. I had intended to socialize at the football game, but I couldn't find anybody to talk to, so I sat down and I pulled out my binder and I wrote something. I wrote the first 2 pages of a scene. This is the scene that inspired my story, but it is so different in the current version. So I'm gonna read you the beginning. Don't take very much of it seriously. Also, I was 14, so do with that what you will. Theo and I walked through a thin, dimly lit corridor of our mansion. The lighting could only be described as intense. The fact that the candles themselves were shaped like every monster imaginable didn't help. I led the way with what little dignity my short, blubbery body could muster. First of all, blubbery? What the heck? We'll get to that later, actually. But let's talk about some of the differences that this scene has later on. First of all, the names for the brother and sister are Theo and Thea, which was based on my now husband, who was my friend and kind of my crush at the time. His last name is Theophanes, and oh my gosh, it's so bad. And then also, in this, I'm writing in first person from the perspective of the sister. But in my current story, I'm actually writing in third person limited from the perspective of the brother, who's now called Thane. What I did keep is the male and female twin pairing, and then a cocky uncle, which you see later in the scene, and a very secretive family. So those are the vibes from that scene. And then 2020, COVID hit in March. I was super bored. I had been recently dumped, so I had very little to do with my time, very little to do with my brain. And I had just learned that Tolkien started with languages, right? So Tolkien created like Elven and Dwarfish and the Mordor language before he even created any of the worlds, any of the stories, any of the like history. All of it was based on the languages, which is super cool. He's a huge nerd, right? And I was like, oh my gosh, I can do that. So I looked up a how-to, and I still have my notes, how to create a naming language, right? So I took notes and I started with letters, like they tell you to. I have an alphabet and sounds to go with those letters, which is insane. And then I made some basic words for naming things. But why have words for things to name things if you don't have countries to name? So I created a map. I drew out all these countries. There's 7 of them. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7. Missed that one. Wait, no, that's a C. 7. And I named all of them. And I actually named all of them based on like their size and how I imagined them. Like one of them is based on the mountains in it. I'm sure a lot of the names will change as I get closer to actually publishing, but then now that I have the countries and the names, they had to have cultures and governments, right? Obviously. So I pulled out my notes from history class freshman year when we learned about culture. I literally have my freshman year history notes on what is culture. I'm a little crazy. It's okay. And so I created the different cultures. I took notes on the different types of governments, and I created 7 unique, brief descriptions for each country, right? And turns out the one that I wrote the least on is actually the one I am most interested in. So let's read it. Ndama, which translates to little beauty. In this culture, youth and beauty are valued and envied. The people of the region are divided by family. Depending on the values of the family, it wasn't uncommon for someone of uncommon beauty to vanish. This was mostly ignored. Usually, and sadly, these people were beaten until permanently disfigured or deformed and added to the slave force. People were expected to be smart, but to be scholarly was foolish. Which, okay, already super dark, and perhaps a little bit ambitious for a freshman in high school. But again, I had just discovered Brandon Sanderson and I was obsessed with the Hunger Games. Don't know what we expected. I then made another map with all of the geography, which all of that from starting the language to ending with this map took me 7 hours only. I sat at my desk for 7 hours straight during COVID and decided that I was going to create a whole world, which is insane. Obviously, it's not very detailed, but hyper-focusing for 7 hours and creating a world is crazy. After that, I didn't really touch it for like a year. And I'm serious, I didn't touch it. I didn't think about it all that much. I was excited that I had built a world. I was impressed with myself, and I was feeling really good about it, but I didn't really know what to do with it. I didn't know what kind of story to write, so I just left it for a while. Then, early 2021, I was best friends with a couple of writers who they were writing really amazing, like fantasy-esque stories. And so I went through my writing stuff and I reread The Scene. And I felt like it actually really, really fit that small country of Ndama that I was really interested in when I created my world. The Scene had a very secretive family. They were insecure about their appearances, specifically Nasha, right, the sister. And it really fit into Ndama's culture, the beauty-focused culture. And I was like, oh my gosh, this would be the perfect story to write for these characters. And then I didn't touch it for 3 years. 3 years. And you want to know why? It intimidated me. I felt like I didn't have enough skill. I didn't have enough talent to actually pull it off. I had a world, I had a story, I had characters I really loved, but I didn't have confidence. And really, that was the only thing I needed to keep going, because it turns out, spring of 2024, all I had to do was start listening to Savannah Gilbo's Fiction Writing Made Easy podcast, and I got excited again about writing. She made it so much easier to build my knowledge and build my confidence because I was learning about scenes and genre and story structure. I actually started to feel like I knew what I was talking about. So I got more excited and I started talking about my story at work. Someone asked me about the plot, right? They asked me, what happens in the book? Okay, what's Nasha trying to do? And I was like, I mean, not really anything. She's not trying to do anything because all she really wants is to feel comfortable in her own skin. Things would have to happen to her for the story to move forward, which didn't feel right to me, especially for a fantasy book. Typically it's an action adventure story, and Nasha just wasn't built for that. And I realized Thane was 100% built for an action adventure fantasy story. And I was like, oh my gosh, Thane would be such a better main character. And not only that, Thane has so much more to learn from the story. He is kind of stuck up. He's very good looking, and he believes he's very good looking and he's valuable in this society. And he has to learn that his reputation doesn't mean anything, right? Or at least it doesn't mean as much as he thinks it does. which is way more interesting to me than following an insecure young girl around, which I will say that I want to tell her story because her story is so much my story that I can't not tell it, at least at some point. But I digress. Thanes was sounding way more fun. And so I put the story in his perspective, and the plot started to like materialize in my brain. Like it actually started to go somewhere. Over the next year, which happened to be also the first year of my marriage, that was August 2024 to August 2025. Over the next year, I explored Ndama, the country, more. I created a in-depth map of just Ndama, right? I created geography for that map. I created like the different rivers that are there, the different cities and their populations. I had a lot of fun like exploring this world. I even created like a history timeline for what they've gone through. I created so much to explore. So many different like world building things, figuring out what Thane actually wants, what Nosh actually wants. I explored so much more in that year than I ever did in this story, in any story really. And I realized how excited I was. And when I was listening to Savannah Gilbo's podcast, she says multiple times when she talks about marketing that authors wish they had started earlier. Every single author she's talked to wishes they started earlier marketing. So I was like, okay, let's do this, right? And I don't know what possessed me, but I listened, right? And so in September of 2025, I started a Bookstagram. I started talking about my reading a little bit. I talked about myself as an author, what I was excited about, what my story was about. I hit some bumps along the way, figuring out how Instagram works, figuring out how to share myself in a way that, you know, held to my privacy, but also was vulnerable enough to connect with people for real. I finally got the motivation and the accountability that I needed to start outlining. So I, for real, started putting my scenes together and my plot together in December of 2025, and I finished in February of 2026, which is so quick. I mean, think about the rest of the timeline. It took me 5 years to get anywhere for real, and then a whole year to really explore the world, explore the characters, and then I outlined in 2 months. Like, come on, like that's crazy. And then not only that, I started writing my draft in February, and I already have written a third of my draft in 4 months. That's the goal of the draft is 85,000 words. A third of that is crazy. Like I'm so proud of myself. I've made it so far, and I'm so excited to share this story with you guys. I'll give you the blurb. So in the story, Thane Gundar, an ignorant rich boy from the capital of Ndama, is unwillingly thrust into the middle of his country's religious extremism and legalism. So he's made a priest against his will, and he figures out all of the ways that they worship beauty that hurts his country, that hurts people around him. He has to learn, and I get to explore what happens to human decency when a society worships perfection and subjective satisfaction, which, you know, sounds like something we're living through. But I digress. I would love for you to do this with me, explore this with me, and, you know, follow along in my journey. So like, comment, subscribe. I'll see you next time.